Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eve Samples, Executive Director at Friends of the Everglades. We're honored to have you here joining a Friends of the Everglades Live on a really important topic that we've been engaged on and that is vitally important to the communities south of Lake Okeechobee and the Glades communities. So that is sugarcane burning. We're going to provide an update for you today, and we have some really important guests with a lot of expertise on this topic who we'll be speaking with for the next hour or so. I want to add that if you're watching us live on YouTube or Facebook, you can add comments and questions in the chat, and we're going to get to some of those at the end of our discussion. We'll talk for about 45 minutes about sugarcane burning, the health impacts, I think it's safe to say, total reluctance to reform this dangerous practice, and most importantly, what you can do to help create some positive change on this front. So before I introduce our guests, I want to thank our sponsor, Conservation Wealth Management, which helps make this presentation possible today. Very grateful for that, and grateful to all of you who are taking time out of your busy schedules to learn a bit more about this topic. So let's start with our guests. Antigone Barton is with us today. She's an investigative reporter at the Palm Beach Post and has done some really important reporting on the topic of sugarcane burning, along with the whole reporting team or members of the reporting team at the Palm Beach Post and ProPublica. They're partners on this topic. Welcome, Antigone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next, we have Christine Lewis-June. She is a Stop the Burn campaign leader. She is an environmental science scholar at Florida A&M University, and also a concerned resident of her hometown of Belglade. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Patrick Ferguson is a Stop the Burn campaign organizer. He's been working with community residents on this issue for years and has a wealth of knowledge on the topic. Welcome, Patrick.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, great. So I'm going to kick it off by sharing some slides just to orient our audience today to the issue of sugarcane burning. For those who don't already know, sugarcane burn season starts every year on October 1st. And this is an image of burning in the Glades communities south of Lake Okeechobee. Burn season runs 6 to 8 months of the year, depending on weather. And these burns impact hundreds of thousands of acres south of Lake Okeechobee. And the smoke and ash from these burns can travel up to 27 miles. So this is really a broad impact. These are the burns permitted today, October 25th, 2023, by the Florida Forest Service. If you want to go to the burn map at any point and check the permitted burns yourself, you can go to fireinfo.fdacs.gov. And you can see from today's burn map that the projected plumes of smoke and ash are all going to the west. That is not an anomaly. That is exactly what happens when burns are permitted. In fact, burns are not permitted when winds are blowing to the east toward Wellington and Royal Palm Beach, which you can see over here. And that's because residents of Wellington and Royal Palm Beach years ago rose up and complained about the really insufferable conditions that resulted when burns were permitted and the winds were blowing their way. Unfortunately, in the Glades communities south of Lake Okeechobee, the same protections have not been granted. And our guests today have been working really hard to grant those protections to the communities. And we're going to talk about how we can make progress on that front. So if you listen to the sugarcane industry, and we're primarily talking about two companies, Florida Crystals and U.S. Sugar, they have deflected criticism, and some of the agencies involved in these decisions, mainly Florida Department of Agriculture, Consumer Services, Florida Forest Service, have indicated that the problem's gotten better, that some reform has been made. But I think these numbers tell a very clear story about how we're not making progress. So I mentioned that burn season started October 1st, and today's October 25th. So thank you, Patrick, for helping us pull these numbers today so we're current. Since burn season started this year, 426 burns have been authorized, totaling 22,111 acres. And we're just in month one of sugarcane burn season. So we have potentially 7 more months to go, at the very least 5 months. The same period last year, we saw 211 burns totaling 10,990 acres. So that's a major problem. And, you see here, this is an agricultural area, but again, keep in mind that the smoke and ash can travel up to 27 miles and affect populated communities. So this is a picture of a burn and also ash on cars. I'm just going to tell a quick story, and then we're going to hear from our guests. I was out in the Glades last Friday, and I had lunch at a great Jamaican restaurant with some folks I was out there traveling with. I was inside for about half an hour, parked my car outside, and when I came out, this was the windshield of my car. This is my car right here. And you can see that it was blanketed in ash. And we had driven up through the Glades communities. We knew there were some burns going on. They weren't right on top of Belle Glade. So this traveled quite a distance and blanketed my car. In fact, I still haven't gotten a car wash. There's a lot of grit on it. This is another car picture that was provided by the Stop the Burn campaign. This is not atypical during burn season. And of course, the paint job on your car is one thing, and the toll this takes on your home, for instance. But the health concerns are a really grave issue that we'll be discussing. I want to show this map because it illustrates how smoky the air can be in areas where sugarcane burning is permitted. Stanford University and NPR mapped the smokiest zip codes in America in 2021. And they did that because of the wildfire issues that were happening out west. But you can see there's a surprise in the data, and Stanford and NPR cited it. The areas around Lake Okeechobee where burning occurs was also a hot spot. Okay, so we're going to turn to our guests now, and I wanted to pull this up because Christine was just profiled within the last week in a really important story in Inside Climate News about how activists from Generation Z are stepping into the fight against sugarcane burning. And Christine, you have a wealth of knowledge and firsthand knowledge of this issue. I'm hoping you'll just talk to us a bit about what it's like from the perspective of a resident to live downwind of sugarcane burning. What's it like for your family and friends? What effects have you seen on them?
Thank you, Eve. So I think it's worth mentioning that I was born and raised in Belgrade, and my family, we lived in the Okeechobee Center. For those of you who are not familiar with the area, it is surrounded by sugarcane fields. So growing up, like I could literally sit in my bedroom, look outside the window, and on days where they were burned, I could see the smoke from my bedroom window from those fields. And as we know, like the wildlife that lives in those fields, when the burns are happening, where are they coming? Into our communities. So not only do we have to sit there and watch, the wildlife coming into our communities, those homes, we weren't fortunate enough to have drying appliances for our clothes, and we relied on hanging our clothes outside to dry. So on the days where we needed to put our clothes out to dry and they were burning, we couldn't put our clothes outside to dry. So we just have to sit here and compromise, find various methods to get our end result and work around the sugarcane burning.
And Christine, can you describe for us a little bit what it's like when the smoke and ash is in the air? Do residents take precautions? Can you keep your windows open? This happens during the nicest weather of the year in Florida. What kinds of precautions do you see?
Yeah, so one of the main things that people are told to do is just to stay indoors, like being elementary school students, like any type of resident that is outside, you're told to go inside, stay inside, close your windows, because all of that wind is carrying the ash, is bringing it into our homes. So the best thing that we were told to do was to close our windows and to keep them closed until after they stop the burning. And that is a huge inconvenience because this you are at risk for all of that exposure. So when we have to sit here and be told, oh, just stay inside, and we can't enjoy the weather, we can't hang our clothes outside to dry. We have to just sit, watch the burns, and just hope for the best.
And do you feel like it's had an impact on the community as a whole? Belglade is one of the lowest income communities in the state. What connection do you see there, if any?
I would say the connection between it is just that there's just so many inconveniences in poor Black and Brown communities, as we know. Like, there's been like a history of it repeating, and being that this is one of the poorest communities in Florida, we don't have access. Well, communities don't have access to the resources that we need, so that we can properly adjust ourselves to these inconveniences. So most majority of the time, we just are left to deal with them.
Thank you for explaining that. It's powerful to hear it from you, Belglade native and resident, when you're not up at school in Tallahassee. And thank you for raising your voice to talk about it. Looking forward to continuing the conversation over the next 50 minutes. I want to turn now to Antigone, who has done some really important reporting on this topic. And Antigone, you've dug into the health impacts of sugarcane burning. I think the total number of burns permitted last year was more than 8,000. And correct me if I'm wrong, we're looking at more than 300,000 acres each season. So we looked at the numbers just from October, but what do medical experts say about the health effects related to smoke and ash from these burns?
Okay, well, first, the effects of the fine particle pollution that settles into the lungs and gets into the bloodstream has been known for a very long time to cause a range of chronic and deadly health conditions, pulmonary conditions and cardiovascular conditions, as well as exacerbate the breathing problems of vulnerable people, the very young, the very old, people with asthma. This is the kind of pollution that's released by industrial pre-harvest fires across acres of sugarcane fields every year for 8 months. Exposure to that kind of pollution, that industrial pollution of fine particle smoke, or smoke carrying fine particles, was linked in international studies in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic to raising the risks of dying from the disease. If you had COVID and were exposed to that kind of pollution, the risks of dying were higher. And this led the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to recommend to fire managers in the United States to suspend permits for these kinds of fires, for large-scale agricultural fires, which they issued that warning. It was up on their website for a little while. And then an industry-backed group wrote to put pressure to bear on the CDC and said that this would stop important measures to provide food during the pandemic. And this is not the first time they've done this or the last, conflating food and sugar, basically. And saying that this kind of activity is necessary that harms people in order to have food. But finally, in 2021, we got a specific study to our area it was led by FSU scientists using 10 years of data, and they linked exposure to pollution caused specifically by fires in the glades from 1 to 6 premature deaths every year in our area. The local health department, in answer to your question, has not responded to the study or to our questions. The former Palm Beach County Health Director, who was in office when that study was released, and we followed up several times with her, had not read the study more than a year after it came out when she was asked to comment on it again. So that's where we stand now. And that study was definitive for our area. It was 10 years of data. It was about, and I need to emphasize this because we'll discuss this later, the response we got subsequently, it was about sugarcane burning in the glades.
Right.
Nothing but the burning to produce sugar.
Right. Really clear evidence based on substantial amount of data, a decade of data. And we are going to talk a little bit later about the really alarming lack of responsiveness by health officials. But first, I want to turn to Patrick. Patrick, You and Sierra Club have been working for years to try to bring solutions to this issue. And I know one of the issues you've been recommending is implementation of buffer zones around these burns to protect residents, and also more broadly speaking, a transition to green harvesting. But let's talk first about the buffer zones to protect the health of residents. What kind of responses have you received?
Thanks, Eve. Well, first and foremost, mandating burn-free green harvesting around the fields closest to surrounding communities remains the most common sense first step approach towards a gradual transition away from burning to modern sustainable green harvesting. And that remains our campaign's, main focus to get the ball rolling on this eventual phase out of pre-harvest sugar field burning. Unfortunately, FDACS, which is in charge of the Florida Forest Service, which currently oversees the sugarcane burning rules, has not acted substantively on these demands. And despite some very superficial changes that were made during Commissioner Freed's tenure, there's been no impactful step within the regulations made to put the industry down a path towards green harvesting. And this brings to bear a very important thing that our campaign has been bringing to light, in addition to the negative impacts caused by pre-harvest sugar field burning, and in addition to the various benefits provided by the alternative of burn-free green harvesting. Our campaign has been shining a light on how far too often state agencies and public officials across the board have prioritized putting the interests of big sugar ahead of protecting the health of Florida residents and the overall health of Florida's environment. So, it's a prime example of big sugar, and special interests in general, really subverting our democracy. So that's what we've seen thus far with, our demands for burn-free buffer zone from FDACS. And, that's why it's all the more important that we continue to educate and mobilize the public, to push for these common sense changes to get the industry to modernize and adapt to burn-free green harvesting.
Thanks, Patrick. So Friends of the Everglades, as I mentioned, got involved in this issue in 2020, trying to amplify the very good work of Stop the Burn, the community organizers, residents, and Sierra Club itself. And not too long after we got involved, the state legislature passed a law expanding the right to farm, so-called right to farm bill. And that prevented residents from taking legal action if they live farther than half a mile from these burns. So even as we're seeing a lack of interest in implementing buffer zones and other common sense solutions, as you say, Patrick, we're also seeing our state lawmakers enact legislation that takes the right of residents away to bring this issue to a judge to determine if they deserve a legal remedy. It's really alarming. The legislature approved that bill in 2021, and Governor DeSantis signed it. We waged a campaign to have him veto that bill, and unfortunately, he signed it anyway. So there's a multi-front attack, and it's definitely related to the power of the sugar industry. They're very politically powerful. And I just want to mention that right now, as we sit, the U.S. Farm Bill is being negotiated by Congress. That bill has been delayed this time. But this industry, and U.S. Sugar and Florida Crystals specifically, receive very generous protections that almost entirely eliminate risk from their business model, even as they're polluting communities via air pollution, and we also work on water pollution issues. So I'm going to talk more about that at the end here. But I want to turn back to Christine. Given everything that we've just discussed, and also that you are a college student and Gen Z and a young person, I'm just wondering if you had any pushback, have received any pushback in response to criticizing this powerful industry. It's a bold and brave thing you're doing.
Thank you, Eve. And as far as contrary responses go, I would say the greatest form of pushback that we've received in the community is just misinformation spread about the effects that residents are forced with as a result of pre-harvest sugarcane field burning. And one of the greatest things that have been floating around the community is that the Stop the Burn, Go Green campaign is trying to take away jobs from the community, when anyone who knows when you're switching over to sustainable practices, whether that be sustainable agricultural practices or just sustainable practices within your home, that requires a great initial investment. And that cannot take away jobs. That can only create more jobs, which will strengthen the community.
Thank you, Christine. I'm glad to hear you haven't faced any personal pushback, and you're right. Stop the Burn has done some really great research on the potential for positive economic impact if there's a transition to green harvesting. So hope that we see some traction there. So Antigone, you talked a bit about the medical implications and the health risks posed by burning. And I want to ask you now to talk about how, following your reporting, health department officials have responded with basically silence. One health official, I read in one of your stories, told you that it was, quote, outside the agency's jurisdiction to issue any kind of warning related to sugarcane burning. Can you give us an overview of the responses you've gotten from state and local officials? And also, I want to ask you about any responses from the companies. Oh, you're muted.
Mute.
Hi. Okay, you showed a slide in the beginning of today's authorized burns, and you can get online. Actually, I check most mornings, and the site is down right now. But most mornings you can get on and see exactly what you showed us. Which way the fires are blowing, what communities will be under the ash and smoke that day, and if the health department, yeah, there you go. Now, if the health department wanted to, they could look at that every day, and they could issue a warning saying, if you live in one of these places, you might want to shut your windows, even though the weather's beautiful outside otherwise, and turn on your air conditioning and not plan on any outdoor activity. They could do that. They obviously don't, or they would have to do it every day. But that is exactly what they did when smoke from the Canadian wildfires came down a couple weeks ago. They issued a warning saying you ought to stay indoors, particularly if you're vulnerable. And that was interesting to me because a few weeks earlier, New York's health department had done that. My sister lives in New York. She had told me about it. We're actually under warning to stay indoors. The smoke is so bad. And I thought, well, our health department will never do that because they won't do it when there's a fire in someone's backyard, in Christine's backyard. I was wrong. They did it when it affects everyone except the sugar companies. I mean, basically, when it doesn't affect an industry that can bring pressure to bear, they send out an alert. So why the difference? What you're saying is correct. The former health official said it's outside my purview. I can't comment on that. We're not allowed to. Her predecessor has said that's just not the case. Her predecessor has said, which is Dr. Jean Malecki, that the reason that she didn't comment on it is at the time that she was in charge of the health department, there wasn't enough evidence to support making those recommendations, and there certainly is now. So as I mentioned, the current or the most recent former health director responded to the FSU study by saying, I haven't read it. U.S. Sugar responded to, this was interesting. U.S. Sugar responded to the study at first by referring it to a consultant who used to work for the health department. I'm not his credentials. I've never quite been able to understand what he did, but he had a title that had the word environmental in it. But now he works for the sugar company. He read the study and he got back to me when I asked the sugar company for comment. And he said, there's no data. Well, that is just false. There were 10 years of data from multiple sources. And I'll just mention in passing, I have a background as a science reporter. I know how to read a study. So I pointed that out. But the other thing he said was that it was biased because the study had been produced by known anti-farm groups. So I said, I didn't know there were any who's anti-farm? What anti-farm groups? And he said, well, academia. Studies, academicians tend to be anti-farm. Well, I've never heard that. I can't imagine why they would be, but almost all studies are produced in academia. They get grants and they produce studies. So that was an interesting response where ergo, any response produced by scientists is biased. So that was their response. And I can touch a little later on the sugar industry, supporters of the sugar industry responded in different ways with misleading information. So, but the direct response from the sugar industry was that the study was anti-farm.
Thanks, Antigone. There's a pattern by the sugarcane industry of complete deflection that is not based in fact. And it reminds me of the billboards they put up in the Glades communities that touted how clean the air is, even as you have cars covered with ash, plumes of smoke in the air. It's just this cognitive dissonance, and we shouldn't let them get away with it. Christine, I want to turn to you real quickly for a response on something Antigone said. So you mentioned that residents of the Glades will close their windows when these burns are happening. How do you know to do that if the health department isn't issuing any warnings? I mean, is it word of mouth, or you see it, you just know?
A lot of the times you have to wait and find out. So by the time you know to close your windows, it's too late. They've already started burning. The ash has already started falling. And you're just like, oh, let me hurry up and close all the windows in the home. Let me text, so-and-so to let them know, like, if you're home, close your windows because this ash is going to get into your homes. So a lot of the times, I can't recall a single health advisory that has been issued. Growing up in the Glades, all I know is I see the ash falling. If you see it on the cars, or if you can smell it sometimes when they're burning the sugarcane, you just know, run, close every single window in the home as quickly as you can and stay inside.
So basically, after you've already been exposed to it is when you try to protect yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. Very, very concerning. So Patrick, let's turn back to you to talk about solutions, because again, there are really obvious solutions to this issue. This is not one of those major environmental pollution problems that doesn't have tangible solutions. We have them and we need to embrace them. So in fact, the country of Brazil, almost the entire country of Brazil, has embraced the solution of green harvesting. You've actually traveled to Brazil. You've talked to many people about the solution. Can you kind of walk us through why leaders were more responsive there and how that came to be?
Sure. So two factors. First and foremost, there's a lot of large urban areas, especially in the state of Sao Paulo, around where the majority of sugarcane is grown. So it had been a big issue, and several local universities had devoted a lot of time and resources into investigating the health impacts of exposure to that pollution. And unlike here in Florida, there was no resistance into the results of those studies. And, no resistance for any academic researchers who wanted to research that important issue. So that was an important factor. And another thing that was hugely important into what led ultimately to the large-scale transition was the fact that there are already test cases in place of sugar growers who, on their own accord, have began phasing out pre-harvest burning in favor of green harvesting. And they noticed firsthand both the agronomic benefits of using the outer leaves and tops as organic mulch that returns more nutrients back into the soil, and also the added economic benefits of using the leaves and tops in the production of various forms of biofuels, such as ethanol, etc. And I got a chance to visit one of those farms in particular, which is referred to as the Green Cane Project, that is ran by a native brand in Brazil. And that's the world's largest organic regenerative agricultural operation of its kind. Produces 1/3 of the world's organic sugarcane supply. And they've proven, how profitable and successful green harvesting can be. So you had an environment where there wasn't this type of irrational resistance, to the implementation and innovation of green harvesting. And the only places where green harvest or where sugarcane burning still takes place in Brazil are very rural areas that don't have access to the modern mechanical sugarcane harvesters that help facilitate green harvesting, or where sugarcane is grown on a steep incline where the machines can't adequately function. So compare that with Florida, whereby the industry is 100% mechanized. And these harvesters are built in with the capacity to green harvest. And we know that the industry regularly green harvests, either when weather conditions prevent burn permit from taking place, or the conditions of certain fields, dictate that they would have to be green harvest versus burnt. So the solution is already, it's a low-hanging fruit, and it's already implemented by the industry. But certainly in any transition, towards an industry-wide process, there are costs involved. And, the industry maintains a position where they would rather continue to externalize those costs in the form of the negative health impacts, the negative impacts on the local economy, rather, than innovate and, really join the 21st century. And it's a shame to see, sugarcane growing operations around the world. Campaign is shown examples in Belize, Zimbabwe, Africa, Australia, and all over the world where organic sugarcane is grown, because USDA certifications require that in order to be organic, that the field crops can't be burned. So yes, the biggest factor that, is a difference between Brazil and the US was there was not the type of resistance that we see from the Brazilian industry that we're currently experiencing with the Florida industry.
Is carbon emissions a factor? I mean, these burns covering hundreds of thousands of acres emit carbon into the atmosphere, and that's obviously a major concern. Do you know if that factored in Brazil or is part of the conversation here?
I think it was a larger part of the equation. In fact, an industry trade group, Unica, has cited a pretty dramatic figure of the amount of removed carbon that has resulted from what was called the Green Protocol, which was the law that led to the gradual phase out of sugarcane burning. So they have shown that it has helped them, meet their commitments to the UN climate agreements. And, so certainly right here in Florida, the annual sugarcane burning contributes to our state's, annual contribution from the agricultural sector of greenhouse gas emissions. And considering the solution of green harvesting, especially if practiced regenerative agriculture, utilizing the leaves and tops as natural mulch, can help with carbon sequestration. So you have a situation where you have this solution that can help us, fight climate change. It can help generate, forms of cleaner energy. and help get rid of this ongoing toxic pollution that harms nearby public health and the environment as a whole. It's a win-win situation.
Thanks, Patrick. And I do think these arguments are achieving higher visibility right now. So Friends of the Everglades and some of our allies went to Washington, D.C. back in July to meet with members of Congress to talk about the sugar protections in the Farm Bill and to make the point that an industry that contributes so much harm in terms of our air quality and water management in Florida should not be so generously protected in the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill protections date back to the Depression era. They've evolved a little bit over time, but they're really outdated, and some of the most generous protections for any agricultural sector in the Farm Bill. And we presented a letter to members of the House Agriculture Committee and Senate Agriculture Committee. That letter was signed by other allies, including League of Conservation Voters, Sierra Club National, the outdoors company Patagonia, fishing guides from the Keys, a really broad array of environmental allies, making the point that we should reform the sugar program in the Farm Bill to address these harms. Sugarcane burning is an obvious one. If that has to be addressed, we're really pushing for that. We're also pushing to have the water management issues addressed in the Farm Bill too. Okay, so let's proceed with our conversation here. Antigone, I want to turn it back to you because I know the Palm Beach Post and ProPublica received significant pushback from the industry following your excellent reporting. In fact, that reporting was a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize last year, and it's really attracted some harsh pushback from the industry. Can you walk us through how they responded and what that looked like?
Yes. So, as Christine pointed out, the main pushback is in a fire hose of misleading information, irrelevantly misleading information. We usually get an op-ed, a mailer sent to Glades residents, public comments from a person or a group who has had direct financial dealings or charitable donations or political donations or a business relationship with the sugar industry, presenting false information as facts to counter our reporting. So you mentioned our Pulitzer Prize winning coverage. That was led by Lulu Ramadan. She received a fellowship from the journalism nonprofit ProPublica to delve into the topic and examine it for a year. It would not have been possible in today's newspaper environment to do that level of investigative reporting without that. One of the things that happened was a flyer produced by, I don't know, portraying Lulu with money raining down on her head, just looking like she was a drug kingpin or something. When my colleague Hannah Morse last year wrote about former Agriculture Secretary Nikki Fried's misleading actions in support of the sugar industry, she said publicly to reporters that Hannah and I had been paid by the Sierra Club to write the story. We didn't even have ProPublica funding. This was just daily shoe leather reporting we were doing. We were paid our salary by Gannett. That's it. That fortunately was rated a pants on fire lie by the fact-checking organization PolitiFact. So those did take the realm of take the approach of personal attacks combined with misleading information. When I wrote about the FSU study, that seemed to raise things to a sort of more frenetic level. The FSU study, as I've said, specifically said sugarcane burning is hurting the people who live in proximity to these fires for 8 months. The burning of those sugarcane fields. That is what the study was about. We received 2 op-eds at the Post. One was from a guy who used to work for the Forest Service, who frequently speaks out on behalf of the sugar industry, or promoting sugar industry's interests, I should say. And he wrote a letter that did have a little bit of a personal attack. My name was the first 2 words in his op-ed, saying that I had written about a fraudulent study, and that this endangered our state's prescribed burning program. And this goes back a long way. When Patrick was mentioning Nikki Fried making superficial changes before, one of the things she did is she presented all these changes, but they were to the prescribed burning program, which is not the same thing as sugarcane burning. And in fact, if you look at the summary that Patrick presented the information from how many fires, those were sugarcane fires. If you can go to that same site and look at other kinds of fires. So they said that this study and my reporting on it was endangering the prescribed burning program. The prescribed burning program is meant to curb invasive species and prevent or control wildfire spread. That's what it's for. It benefits the environment for all of us. Sugarcane burning, as Christine pointed out, it doesn't really benefit the sugar company either. If they were to invest in green harvesting, they would probably be better off. But they are the only ones to benefit from sugarcane burning. They have found it to be an expeditious way of harvesting. So conflating those 2 activities is a argument that's been made, at least going back to Nikki Fried and her supposed changes to a different set of rules. But that's it. The reason that has been successful is it makes a very simple issue. Can you pollute the air that people in residential communities breathe? Is that an okay thing to do? It makes it seem very complicated, like there's larger shared interests, like our ability to control wildfires or our farms. The second op-ed we got, which was actually funny, was from a Farm Bureau chief. And he said that my writing about the FSU study was endangering the world food supply. And I'm not kidding. Beans, lettuce. Actually, I printed it out because here's facts we have about Florida farmers. They grow food that feeds the world. And he goes on that the cucumbers, the grapefruit, the squash, tomatoes, and that the world population is growing and that we won't have enough food to eat. Because I wrote about the FSU study, which, let's get back to reality, was about sugarcane burning.
Right. And
in reality, you could stop producing sugar and we would all survive just fine. In fact, many of us would be healthier. So, when an industry and its allies, and it has, as I say, gotten worse since the FSU study, when they have to respond with arguments that don't just stray from the truth, but they literally just stray from the entire topic, it's revealing. It means they don't have an argument. And that's what we've seen.
I also have heard criticism, the anti-farmer criticism, and we at Friends of the Everglades are not anti-farmer, anti-agriculture. I packed a salad for lunch today. I'm going to enjoy it very much. I appreciate farmers. We just believe that farming practices should not harm residents or destroy our environment. And there are very logical safeguards we can put in place to achieve that balance. And again, Antigone, I just want to repeat what you said. We are talking about sugar cane burning. We're not talking about burning bean fields.
That is exactly right. Well, and I just wanted to mention, when you brought up the Right to Farm Bill, that's a classic use of that. What the Right to Farm Bill is, if you look at it, it's a right to pollute bill. Different activities.
That's right. Thanks. So, Patrick, I have a question for you, and I just want to remind our audience before I get to it that if you have questions, please put them in the chat, either on Facebook Live or YouTube, and we'll be able to see those and get to some questions as we get to the tail end of our discussion here. But Patrick, I'd like to ask you about an important action that Sierra Club took just within the last couple of months in relation to sugarcane burning. Sierra Club filed a complaint with the Environmental Protection Agency. Tell us what that's all about.
Yeah, so in lieu of the lack of substantive action we've seen at the state level to address the issue of sugarcane burning, we've taken the step to file a Title VI civil rights petition with the EPA and the USDA. And, with that petition, we are asserting that the discriminatory sugarcane burning rules that are based off wind direction and speed, as we have addressed previously in this webinar, and the fact that the communities that are prioritized protection are predominantly whiter, more affluent communities. And the communities that have to disproportionately bear the negative pollution consequences are predominantly Black and brown communities. The way this is carried out is currently in violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And because the Florida Forest Service and FDACS receives federal funding from these agencies, then the goal of this action is to have them initiate an investigation, and with the hopes that will lead to a finding that the current permitting system is in violation of that act, and can put the Florida Forest Service, FDACS, down a path of instituting rules such as a burn-free buffer zone that will lead to the eventual phase out of the practice and green harvesting. Otherwise, then all federal funds would be withheld. So right now, we just recently filed this, so it is pending review. Certainly, we'll keep folks updated on how that process proceeds. But it does, mark an important step in this movement of, really stepping in and, getting the federal government to step in where the state government has continually dropped the ball and has failed to adequately address this situation.
Can you just explain briefly what Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is? Yes.
So it is part and parcel of the Civil Rights Act that was passed in 1964. So basically any federal institution or state agency that receives federal funding that withholds any rights or benefits, based on race, or class, or any protected class, then would be subject to these violations. And in the case of sugarcane burning, we're pointing to a fact where whole communities are withheld the rights to protection from pollution in a racially discriminatory manner. And one of the things to point to is the fact that when the rules were initially put in place in the early 90s, when communities of Wellington and Central Palm Beach County were put in place, the argument was made that, it was done then due to an increase in population. Well, right now, the combined population of the communities within the Glades is roughly on par with what the population was when these communities were built out in the early 90s. So really that argument doesn't, stand. And we're able to point to, situations where the same sugarcane field, one day due to wind conditions, a permit will be denied, and then the next day in the same spot will be approved. and the pollution blows towards the predominantly Black and brown Glades communities. So these are some of the things that are being brought to bear within this Title VI civil rights petition. So stay tuned for how that progresses.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. I do see a couple questions coming in from the audience. If we have others, please add them to the chat and we'll get to those. Christine, I want to turn back to you. Actually, I have a two-part question. Number one, I'm just wondering if there is a greater critical mass in the community now, more people like you who are willing to speak up on this issue, if you're seeing a groundswell resulting from the increased media coverage. And then the second part of my question is, how can people listening to this issue or other people who care about this issue help support the Glades communities to find solutions?
I would say there's definitely been an influx of people getting involved with the issue, especially people who are Gen Z. I would say with posting on social media, I've been getting a lot of positive feedback from people in the community, especially with the presence of the scientific research being published by FSU. And we have the data to support our cause behind the campaign. So a lot of people are opening their eyes, opening their ears, and listening to the concerns that have been present for decades. And as far as things that non-residents of the community can do in support of our campaign is signing our petitions to bring larger awareness to the campaign and the needs of the community. Maybe getting in contact with Patrick or going down to our office in Belgrade, getting bumper stickers or yard signs to show support and to bring awareness of the Stop the Burn campaign, purchasing organic sugar in comparison to conventional sugar. And the last thing that I want to add is that residents have the option to attend a public demonstration on November the 1st, which is next week. It'll take place in downtown West Palm Beach at the Palm Beach County Department of Health, a main office from 4:30 to 5:30. So residents or non-residents who are interested in being in support of members of the community and being on the right side of sustainable farming, please join us next week.
Thanks, Christine. And I'm just going to ask Allie, who's our communications director behind the scenes, to share the photo of last year's rally. Last October, so this time last year, there was a demonstration in front of Florida Crystal's headquarters demanding a stop to the burn. And there was a significant turnout. And as you said, Christine, on November 1st, there will be another gathering in front of Florida Crystal's headquarters in downtown West Palm Beach to demand the same. This issue isn't going away, and I know many committed advocates are going to keep raising their voices. So on that note, we're going to take a few questions with the time we have left, and we can jump in whenever Allie's ready to queue up our first question. Okay, so Katie Delk from TC Palm, a reporter, says, thank you for the talk, and asks, Antigone, what was your response when U.S. Sugar sent air quality measurements? Were they taken during burns? Were they flawed?
The biggest issue, our past reporting has found the one air quality monitor in Belgrade is not up to the task of measuring those short-term bursts of pollution. The other thing is that, they were flawed in terms of relevance to what people are experiencing during fires, presenting an average of air quality issues across all time, all months, all day. So, the issue is the exposure to the smoke when there's a fire and the frequency of fires. And that is what they weren't addressing. It's, the Glades are a rural area. It's beautiful out there. I went out during the non-burning season to interview someone whose backyard overlooks a sugarcane field. And it was just idyllic. It was a beautiful day. The air was fresh and clear, much better than here because we don't have as much, they don't have as much vehicular traffic. But there was a study some time ago comparing during burn season the air quality of Delray Beach and burn season coincides with tourist season in Delray Beach. And the air quality for that small particle pollution was worse in Belglade. So the U.S. Sugar is presenting something very selectively, and and they act like it is a disinterested data, and it is not.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, I know you've looked at the data pretty closely too. Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, and one of the important things to keep into account is that in determining compliance with the Clean Air Act, that all comes from data from state-run air quality monitors. And the current rules for determining compliance are determined by both annual averages and 24-hour averages. And the issue with that in comparison to sugarcane burning is, you're talking about short-term spikes of pollution, which the way the air quality is monitored at these state-run monitors can get lost out within those averages. And there's no better example of pointing out that flaw than in the study that was carried out during the ProPublica investigative report. Used air quality monitors that took measurements within 10-minute intervals versus the hour-long intervals at the state-run air quality monitor. And regularly, when sugarcane burns were blowing towards the city, those monitors picked up spikes as much as 4 times regular background levels that were not picked up on the state-run air quality monitor. And that's besides the fact that that monitor, as has been pointed out for years, had been designated as non-regulatory by the EPA because it wasn't meeting the proper standard and requirements. So the result of that system is that the sugar industry and U.S. Sugar's Clean Air Report, they're able to use the fact that there is not these reported violations to create a narrative. Oh, hey, look, nothing to see here, no violation. So it's very misleading. That's something that comes up a lot, and it's important to understand how just pointing to the data from those readings can be misinterpreted when it comes to sugarcane burning.
And again, we have 10 years worth of data from the FSU study. That seems quite conclusive. And we dealt with this with the cigarette industry, with big tobacco decades ago, right? Where big tobacco indicated there wasn't enough evidence to suggest that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer. And they delayed. And finally, we got Surgeon General warnings on cigarette packages. And we have the data now on sugarcane burning. It's clear. If you have any questions, drive out to Belglade, have lunch like I did last Friday. And if the wind is blowing toward you, when there's a burn, there's a good chance you'll see the smoke and ash, and you'll really understand when you see what a health risk this is. And I think Christine described it so vividly. You're running to close every window in your house after you smell the smoke or see the ash. So major concerns and obvious reforms needed that all of us will continue to push for. Antigone, I know you're not an advocate, you're an impartial journalist, and we appreciate your reporting on this. Okay, so I'm going to see if we have any more questions. And let's see. We can take a question here. I think we have one. Did Rhonda Roth have a question or a comment, it looks like? We could cue that one up. Okay, here's another one. So sugarcane burning, recent Palm Beach County threats and hazards public survey conveniently left out sugarcane fires as a community threat or hazard selection on the list provided, even after all the recent reporting and studies. So Antigone or Patrick or Christine, are any of you familiar with that threats and hazards public survey? I'm not.
Yes. In fact, my attention was drawn to, it might have been a separate survey where one of the options for local environmental health risk was not sugarcane burning, but muck fires, which I thought was pretty interesting. But really, that is just a symptom of the overall problem that we see in government agencies across the board, of them being reluctant and fearful to step on the industry's toes. Even when it comes to really failing in their agency duties. And this brings us to the point of why we were gathering in West Palm next Wednesday, November 1st. We have reached out to, there's a new Department of Health, Palm Beach County Department of Health director, reached out to set a meeting. And we've been completely ignored, part of the course. The data is there. People are continuing to suffer. And all we are asking for the local Department of Health to do is their job. They regularly issue health advisories when it comes to algal blooms or any other threats. If there's an animal with rabies, you're going to get an alert that goes out. And we point to examples when communities that don't usually deal with sugarcane smoke do, such as Parkland, Coral Springs. The fire department will, send out public health alerts. Hey, if you have respiratory issues, stay inside. But there is nothing, not a peep, when it comes, to residents being impacted within Palm Beach County, which has, 75% of the total sugarcane acreage that is grown and burned each year. So we're not going to tolerate this silence anymore, and that's why we're gathering, and we encourage folks who can attend locally to join us next week. And we're simply asking the Department of Health to start looking out for protecting people as they should, and not for protecting the interests of Big Sugar.
Health is right there in their name, so we're asking them to do their job. I think that's well put, Patrick. I'm going to share my screen briefly, and then I'm going to pass it around to each of you to offer some closing comments. So one thing that Friends of the Everglades has been engaged in is our effort to reform the sugar program and the Farm Bill. As I mentioned earlier, the Farm Bill is being actively negotiated by Congress. This is a huge bill that's approved by Congress every 5 years, and we have an opportunity in this moment to stop so generously protecting an industry that is polluting the air and water in Florida. So if you're interested in signing this petition, please go to everglades.org. It's right there on our homepage, and we're working to reach 7,500 signatures. As you can see, more than 5,600 people have signed it already. So on that note, I'll pass it around to each of you for some closing remarks. If you can kind of offer a takeaway in 30 seconds or less for our audience, what you want them to remember from this talk today. Antigone, we'll start with you.
Yes, just one thing I wanted to point out, and this has come up repeatedly in my reporting, but also in my personal experience, is that the pollution produced by the sugarcane burning affects everyone. There is a very obvious element of environmental racism and injustice in the way the rules for authorizing burns have been put in place. But you can't predict the wind. The smoke drifts and it affects other communities. It also affects our overall environment. I first smelled smoke from sugarcane fires when I first started working on the island of Palm Beach, and my throat was burning. The wind had shifted. So I think it's important for that to be understood. But of course, the main reason that this practice continues is because it affects a group of people, a group of communities that have limited political clout, and I would also add limited media coverage. As newspapers have constricted in recent years, the Glades gets ever more distant, and we have to go out there to see what's happening, and that's unfortunate. At the same time, we now have data, so it is to be hoped that the data makes up for the distance. I guess the one thing about the data, again, being there in person, shows this is real. The obfuscation that we faced every time we report on this has been dispiriting because it doesn't address the topic of the impact on people's lives, their quality of life, and their health, and their longevity.
Thanks, Antigone. I think it's a great point that this affects all of us, whether you live in the Glades or not. This is not a good practice for Florida. Thank you. Patrick, your final takeaway?
Yeah, and in addition to the larger public health impacts too, we know that this is connected to the water issues too. All that pollution, what comes up must come down. That asphalt gets into Lake Okeechobee, nearby waterways, and the fact that we've been able to see the benefits long term of where green harvesting has been fully implemented, has really shown that, hey, if we get a green cane project in Florida, especially the sensitive Everglades Agricultural Area, there's so many downstream positive impacts that can be had. So there's really a lot at stake in this issue. And the solution is just so clear. And ultimately, in the long term, can benefit the sugar industry as well by producing, new sources of revenue, new job opportunities locally, and it's really a win-win situation. And now, it's been a slog in years past, but now we've got so much momentum with the new data coming in. So I encourage everybody, in the public to stay tuned. If you haven't joined our mailing list yet, I suggest you go to stopsugarcaneburning.org and sign up. We're going to have a new call to action coming out very soon. And like I said before, for folks living locally within South Florida who can make it, we'd love to have you show up to our protest we're planning downtown West Palm, outside the Department of Health next Wednesday. So stay tuned and keep at it. We're making a lot of progress, and I think ultimately the solution we're all fighting for is just around the corner.
That's right, Patrick. There is momentum, and there's been great media coverage. I know not as much as you want, Antigone, but definitely great coverage. Very important momentum. Christine, I think it's appropriate to give you the final word as a resident of Belglade.
Thank you. And as it has been mentioned in this entire discussion, the health effects have been brought to light by scientific research. We've heard firsthand from Antigone and from Patrick how the sugar industry, or how Big Sugar, chooses to respond as a result of this information being presented to them. And one thing I just want to have you guys take away is that sustainable methods calls for considerate farmers. If there is no action being brought forward to better the health of the community, that gives you the answer that you need to know, and that lets you know what you need to do to help our community.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you for raising your voice. And thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Antigone, for bringing your expertise to the table. We hope to see you all November 1st for a demonstration against this practice, and we will continue to keep you updated. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.